advanced color techniques in Illustrator, and they're pretty easy and fun. But remember that the core of everything is drawing. So, once you're good at drawing, and not only good but comfortable with it, like once you sort of have the knowledge in your fingertips of when to click and pull, that's the only time, that's how Illustrator will unlock for you, right? By having that knowledge. So so today we're going to draw some eggplants. So if you're following along and you are struggling with the pen tool and getting all twisted up, then even though it seems like extra work, you should go back and look at the assignments from the previous week and redo all those drawing exercises until you're comfortable with them. So the only point of them is to make you comfortable and to build your skill through practice. So if you sort of like shortcut those exercises in any way, then you won't find anything else that you do in Illustrator really that fun. Okay, so I'm just going to do this briefly, but you should do a whole drawing when you do it. So essentially, we're going to draw an eggplant, but you know how up until this point, we've only been using these flat colors, right? So basically the question is, how do we do something nuanced and dimensional like this, like get these reflected colors and see that blue on the eggplant? How do we enhance our drawings with these kind of colors? So just like before, I'm going to set up a drawing flow. I always use layers in Illustrator, but you notice like some people, like Mia, will build everything in one layer and then be really conscious of groups and be really conscious of layer order. That's fine as well. But for me, I always keep my source image on one layer and lock it. And then I would have two separate layers, and this is probably whatever eggplant is in behind and whatever is in front, right? Because for me, I don't want to draw this as one thing, because then I have to not only draw this shape precisely, but I have to cut this shape. I have to cut this shape out based on this shape, right? So this is the base eggplant. Anyways, let's just do it, and we'll have more of a sense of it. All right, so click, and now this is round, so it's already kind of this mental thing for me that it's always going to be click and pull, right? I keep everything short, keep things away from each other. I don't bother too much if I'm unsatisfied with my drawing when I'm first making it, because it's really hard to edit a drawing while you're drawing it, but it's really easy to afterwards, right? So I'm just using the pen, clicking and pulling, always going the same direction, and in no way am I trying to accommodate this green part here, right? Okay. So now, whenever I set up the pen, I do direct selection followed by the pen. So now I have direct selection hidden in my command tool, and this is let's just try this out a little. This is a new control device in Illustrator since Illustrator 2019. And you can see that when I move this around, it moves the length of the curve. Meh, not my favorite. So mostly what I look for is when these are too flat, right? And I know to look for every point having a handle because I click and pull, right? Okay. But remember, we're not concentrating too much on the drawing. But I'm just taking you through maybe how this would be, right? Now I go ahead and grab the eyedropper and grab a mid-tone for the purple. And now here's another cool thing about layers. So I'm actually going to use more layers than I anticipated. I'm going to turn this off, and then I'm going to draw the little cap on top of it. Maybe this will be a little more angular. All right. So then I just clicked because I want that to be straight. But for the most part, yeah, and then you can kind of do a connect the dot thing. It doesn't bother me if, the lines aren't perfect, or if you summarize this as an angular line. There's nothing in that bothers me. All right, now for eyedropper on the keyboard, and I just grab that green, and then I sort of put this together, and this is a pretty standard style of Illustrator drawing that you might sell to a farmer's market or something. All right, now I'm going to add a couple more layers. So see my structure here, I have an eggplant, and then I have the little hat that goes in the eggplant, and this is the next eggplant, and then the next hat, right? Yeah, whatever helps you have a little mental record of what your drawing is going to be like. All right, now I'm clicking and pulling, and I'm just concentrating on that round shape. And I don't care, I call it like a cutout, right? Like, see, oh, this is complex, I have to draw this, and then I have to draw this. Like, anytime I can get that in one, then I just think of it as a different shape or a new layer or something like that. So this, I really want this shape to be as simple as possible because I'm thinking about my own speed in the drawing as well. And then I click and pull to finish. I on the keyboard gives me the eyedropper, and that gives me purple. All right, now the reason I like layers is because you don't, like what I used to do in Illustrator is, see how I still have to draw the cap. So I would do this. I would take the shape I just made and then move it off and draw the cap. But then I got kind of annoyed with having to always move the shape back into place and always reassemble my drawing. So then I got a little bit more into layers, and that lets me keep my drawing in the same place, but then hide it with the eye. But many people don't use layers at all, so that's fine. But remember, as a digital artist, you might have a high production job. So see this how I've been click click click, and then I clicked and pulled right there because I felt it was turning from straight points into a curve. So you might have a high production job or something like that, but anyways, there just is a point in your use of Illustrator where you will look for whatever speeds up your own process individually. And for me, it's a little more layers heavy. All right. Okay, so now I have pretty much all this set, and I can just click all these layers back on, and I have a really nice kind of vanilla-ish drawing, right? Let's see. In your drawing now, we're thinking about complete illustrations. So I'm going to add another layer here, and even if I don't put a whole lot of detail or thought into this, don't deliver something. Don't do something floating on a white background, right? Do something, even if this is just one thing back here. Um, and then this is good in terms of like just artistic thought too, of how you focus something. Like how do you focus something? And a really good way to do it is just not to add that detail of the boards, right? All right. Now I'll do another, and I'm gonna actually just continue on this layer. Um, but even though this is not the main point, then it's still worthwhile to always just think about having complete illustrations, right? Cool. And now in this case, these are both on the same layer. So I'm going to use Object, Arrange, Send to Back to get this to line up with what I wanted. Cool. All right. Now the technique I want to show you though is, so basically we're going to turn off all of these things except for one of these eggplant bodies, right? Oh, and the source photo. So I'm actually going to choose this one and leave this one off. So in order to attain all that beautiful color work, we're going to use a tool called Mesh Warp. So what we do is we first start by selecting an object and do all your refinements here. Like, see that little bit of crunchiness that I made? Oh, that was where I was trying to do that special point. I really don't like that. You can use the pen to delete extra points. Okay, and then remember, if you hold Option, you can change the nature of it. So that was a straight point. We want nice smooth curves throughout. Let's see. And then direct selection gives you access to the handles. So if you feel like anything is a little bit like, compressed or inorganic or something, just change it before you do this process. Then do regular selection. Then you're going to select it here. All right, now you are going to add a mesh warp, which is right here, the mesh tool. It's U on the keyboard, but it's so specialized you'll never need to know the keyboard command for it. Now, you only have done the mesh tool when something is selected, right? So something's selected, and now that means that the mesh is going to apply to this. Now you want the mesh to be pretty loose. This is another thing where, like, if you go around and click, like if you just click tons and tons and tons and tons, you're gonna be punished, not rewarded, because your mesh will just turn into a grid, right? So you want it open enough to hide that it is a grid, and then it's sort of, you don't really get to choose where it falls, but it will, you can kind of like do it on existing lines. So that's about right. And you'll want to be using direct selection as well to move those points around, right? So see what I mean? If you went like this and then made that a different color, then that would look like this big weird protrusion, right? So we're making something smooth for a reason, because we're practicing making a smooth looking illustration. All right, so now there are levels. This is where you really understand direct selection, or you just, so this is your chance to understand direct selection. So see how I have the white arrow, and then this area of the grid is surrounded by these 4 points and these 4 lines. So if I click inside that grid, then I get that whole box, right? Now if I hold, now if I go back to my eyedropper tool and I color that grid, then I'll get a box-shaped color area, right? So you want to be very careful and very in charge of what you do in selection. And let's see if there's a way to do direct selection followed by the eyedropper. So now we're using the eyedropper, but if we press Option, we'll get direct selection. So that's perfect, right? So, so just note that you can select a square and color a whole square. You can select a line, and then you'll just color a line, right? So let's see what that looks like. Oh, it didn't do anything. Yeah, but anyways, but what I generally do is I use points, right? Okay, I'm going to use a point. I'm going to find the brightest part of this other one. And then I'm seeing like 2 reflections on here. So I'm going to select that with direct selection. So I'm switching between the eyedropper and direct selection by pressing Command. And then I'll sort of go in. I really like where that shadow turns blue. I think that's really cool. Selecting each individual point and just adding some more dimension and some cool counter shadows, right? This point, I'm going to choose that to be brighter. And then this point, and you can sample from what you've established too. This whole square, maybe I'll sample. Cool. So that looks really great. Now you can do the same thing with the stem if you're careful, right? But see how kind of like round and dimensional that looks. It's kind of more satisfying from a painter's perspective. All right, so now let's bring the stem back and let's disappear the rear eggplant, and then we will do another mesh. So there's the mesh tool, and I want it to apply to this, right? It's okay if it changed the color while you're working. That's fine because we're going to change it back. And you can see that it sort of follows those contours where it's like a little bit crunchier. But if you look at the way the stem looks anyways, it sort of has a grid shape on it anyways, right? So, okay, so we are going to Actually, let me redo this because it's going to be way better if I start with the green. All right, so when I click the shape, then I get that color. Then when I start adding the mesh, everything that I add in the mesh will still be green. So that's a good starting point because that's a really good color. Um, all right, now I load up my tools with direct selection first and then the eyedropper second. So whenever I press command, I get direct selection and then I switch back to the eyedropper. And then I sort of will choose one line. And if you want to be fancy but don't confuse yourself, you can hold shift and direct select a whole line of points there. Because I'm seeing this kind of grid shape here. So I have that whole line selected and then I'll choose that dark color or maybe even this beige color. It's hard to find a good color. Okay. Now I'm going to do, I'm holding that. I'm holding command on my keyboard. I'm adding shift to give myself a whole line. And I'm going to go all the way up here and then I'm going to get one of the darkest colors I can find here. Right? So we're just holding command and shift, just giving ourselves a lot of extra artistic possibilities, right? But you can't manipulate this thing that much. If it's too complex, it doesn't work. And so I really doubt if I could get something like the definition of the original shape using this. There's no real shortcut for it. I would just have to kind of draw this, right? So I would take this, if I wanted this shape to stand out from the stem, I would just draw it. And that is how I would run that. All right, well, you get the idea. It's a complete illustration using mesh warp color, and it should be something like this. Like, you can bring in as many vegetables as you want. You don't have to use just one image. I just found the image from Google Image Search, and then I do file place into Illustrator to place it and start my drawing. You can go bananas with it. Just show me this mesh warp technique. There can be fruit. You can then use separate elements and combine them. You can render the whole thing using mesh warp. Whatever you feel like doing. But this technique is just invaluable from when you're feeling like, Illustrator is kind of basic in terms of color, even though the gradients are cool. And when you want to do something a little more volumetric, I almost always use this. And, in the production world, you'll need it constantly. Okay, so that's it for that assignment.